Now we can actually start the real transfer. So Katie and Lewis, please stand up. You look so hungry.
Very.
All positions, good, good, good. Oh, I forgot something. Everyone in between, welcome to the talk. Please stand up. Yes. Warm applause for everyone. Thank you. Joke. Yeah, first row, sorry. So just so you know what you have to do. We're gonna transfer some pancakes from that side there. And then Lewis will eat them, and they will get back, right? That's not hard. And just to make it easier for everyone else, you should turn around so they can see you. And remember, it's all about the performance, right? So fast as possible. Okay, okay, okay. All set up? Yeah? Can we start? So, okay. Set, ready, go! So we start the first round trip with 2 segments. That's good, that's good. Oh, he looks so hungry. He looks so hungry. Oh my God. Yes. Moving on, moving on. That's a really bad round trip time. I'm sorry. Oh, we got a knock. That's good. That's good. Nail it. Eat. Faster, faster. Pass it back, pass it back. Oh, there's even a love note. I like that. I love that. And next, so you can receive more. He's almost finished. Yeah, so increase. Yeah, we just now get us 4 segments. 4.
We have a bug.
Oh no, this TCP connection is like. Good, good, good. And moving on. So now we have 4 segments. We increased, right? He looks so hungry right now.
So what I would suggest is you get creative. So I'm taking something that someone else has built and I'm extending it with Wikipedia data. Okay? Wikipedia have an API to get recent edits to Wikipedia articles. To actually connect to the API is like, wow, it's like literally 3 lines of code. It's amazing. And so those 3 lines of code, event source, which is built into client-side JavaScript, will allow you to connect to the API, and in a second, we will get API responses, just, again, 3 lines, from Wikipedia telling us every time someone edits an article. Okay? Now there's an important concept that we have to understand to see how this works. The visualization that I'm going to show you. This is roughly, let me just undock. This is roughly what we get from Wikipedia. And the key part that we need to pay attention to is this user field. That user field will be an IP address if the user was anonymous. If the user was logged in, which represents like 85% of Wikipedia edits, that will be something like whatever Pixie Fairy 209, and it will be a string and you can't do anything with that and you don't get location data. If it's an IP address, you can pipe that IP address into any geocoding service, which is what I've done for like tens of thousands of tweets over the course of many days. And the best part about that is you get a latitude and a longitude. Okay, so what is the point of this? Well, it allows us to plot those lat longs onto a globe. And again, I didn't, like, this is amazing, I didn't make it. Someone at Mozilla did for Twitter. I'm simply extending it with Wikipedia edits. But it's something pretty to look at. I did do this.
So for the expression A plus B, if either A or B is a string, we're doing string concatenation with coercion if necessary. And then otherwise, if both A and B are not strings, we're doing number addition. So at this point, I'm feeling kind of like this. We've got this great model, we're cruising through this, so let's try something a little more interesting. What if I want to add some other things? Okay, so what do you think the JavaScript engine is going to give us, or what might you want to get when you add these 2 arrays in this first example here?
So why diversity matters? I mean, we know here that it does, but it can be a bit of a hard sell sometimes. Right? So yeah, it's got to improve diversity, but why? So first, like, diversity in general, there are a lot of studies that show they're happier, but the important bit, if you want to say, is that they perform better. And also in terms of product, you're building some sort of product. A more diverse team will make a more diverse product and will appeal to a wider audience, obviously. And you'll avoid like awkward moments like this.
Create a reminder.
I don't know what you mean by create a main.
And this is funny, but the reason why I show it, we're talking about an English product made by people who speak English to other people who speak English, and it still went wrong. So even in that context, we can forget stuff. So can you imagine when you're targeting a demographic you have no clue about? If you could avoid like signs of like the Silicon Valley kind of like stereotype, I see these on a lot of offers. But the thing is, usually when you see this, it comes from a good intention. What you're trying to say is that we care about our people and we like taking them out. Which is what you do, but there are easier ways of doing it, and by putting this on an offer, you'll exclude people who don't drink alcohol, etc., and maybe take them out for lunch instead of Friday nights, because people could have other commitments.
Okay, so here are two libraries that I wanted to share with you because I think these libraries are very, very cool. I use these for an application for a tool called M, which is a terminal dashboard that I built so that I could manage all my Twitter likes and bookmarks, because I treat them like bookmarks, and I want to be able to like search them, like put them into categories and all that stuff. And I thought it'd be cool if I just do this in my terminal, because I didn't really have time to build a full-blown web application for this. So yeah, I used Blast and Blast Contrib for this.
So once you've isolated your code from the environment, you can check the interactions. So we want to check that when we fill out data in the form and submit it, it sends the right data to the server. So we can do that using jQuery to fill out values in the form and trigger the submit event. And then we can check that the post method was called with the data that we expect. This is what spying is really great for. It's for testing side effects. So when you perform an action, you check that your component sends some data to another part of the system. So having checked that that interaction takes place, you should check what the possible outcomes of it could be. So for our client-side form handling code, we either know that the response will either be successful and will perform a redirect, or will fall through and will display the errors on the page. So we can handle that in our tests by saying, when the response is successful, we can stub and provide a successful response. Then we check that the redirect is performed. So we can use our spy that we set up on the redirect function to check that that redirect function gets called, and that's how we know that the redirect is being done without it actually taking place, if that makes sense. When the server returns an error, we don't want to do that. So instead we can write a stub that returns a failed response and check that the redirect function is not called. So it's important to check that these different outcomes of the interaction produce different behavior in the thing that you're testing. If you're testing for something positive, always test that changing a decision produces the opposite outcome. We can also write a test at the end for checking that the errors from the response are displayed on the page. When we run these tests, you'll see that they run very, very quickly. You could run hundreds of these tests per second because they're not really interacting with the server. They're not doing anything particularly complicated other than just running your application code. The testing infrastructure isn't adding a lot of overhead. And you can write a test suite that checks a lot of very fine-grained details about your software very quickly, which makes it very cost-effective.
So what does it mean to developers like us? So for a very long time, if you want to do any kind of dynamic feature in your web app, you had to use JavaScript. And you had to actually rely on your browsers to kind of do the heavy lifting of giving you this performance boost. So JavaScript engines kind of did that for you. They were like good friends. JIT compilers have some examples. But there's a lot of engineering and good work done around a lot of static type languages. What if you could reuse that, right? What if you could use some image processing modules that have been statically typed on the web? That could be the best thing that could happen, right? So WASM is trying to solve those problems. What WASM tooling system basically gives you is that you could take the C++ code or Rust code or C code and the other languages and convert it to WASM modules, which are like really small, optimized, and your browser understands. So you could probably use all those functions from your favorite library in the web. So thus bringing native performance to the web, and you could create desktop-like feature apps and stuff in the web as well. So that's pretty cool.
But the thing I did not expect when I was teaching these kids to code was that I would learn some incredibly valuable lessons of how I as a developer can continue working and pick up skills. Let's talk about the first one, breaking things. So first up, if there's one skill that kids have that I wish I still had in me, is this incredible curiosity and tendency to break stuff. I don't have that anymore, and I wish I still had it. So I'll give you an example of what we were doing. We were making a little spacefaring game. You're a little ship and you're dodging asteroids. And so the kids asked me, Ramon, what's a good speed, right? And I said, like, don't worry about the numbers themselves, but I'd say something like 20 meters per second, 40 meters per second. That sounds pretty good. But what they ended up doing was putting an incredibly high speed. And this I found in a lot of different places. For example, they would ask me, Ramon, how many enemies do you think I should place on the screen? And I said, I think 4 or 5, that's pretty good. And in my head I'm thinking, I'm aiming low because they're surely gonna go for 10. I was wrong. We're making a little jump and run game. You play as a little character, kind of like Super Mario, you jump, you collect things. And they asked me, Ramon, what's a good force to jump off the ground? And honestly, at this point you get the idea, right? At the beginning, this used to really stress me out because I was like, why, they would get annoyed that their game wouldn't work or something. And I sat down. I remember I sat down like after the winter semester and I seriously gave this a good amount of thought. And I decided, you know what? This is great. This is how I work sometimes. When I want to find out how a framework works or how a programming language works, I just go for it. And the cool thing that I noticed is that the kids were also having new conversations with me. I would ask them, so, okay, your game is running extremely slowly. Why do you think that is? And they tell me, my laptop can't handle this. And it really settled in my head how important it is to have a good time with what you're doing. And never lose that passion for just playing around and breaking things.
I want to talk about a feature that I use all the time, screenshots. You can take screenshots with the help of DevTools. In the past, this feature was only available in the Canary version, and I used to use it, but I stopped because it was crashing too much. I work on really heavy applications, and it was not really helping me much, so I stopped using it. But now, nowadays, you can also find screenshots in the stable release. So if I just, go Command-Shift-P, Command-Shift-P and type screenshots, you can see that you can capture the full-size screenshot. That's a screenshot of the whole page. Just capture a node screenshot of a single DOM node, or capture a screenshot of the viewport. I use all these options quite often because I have to share my work with a lot of the UX designers I work with product managers for approvals. So it's really super handy. And one thing that's actually missing here, and you cannot find, unfortunately, in this menu, is something that you can find if you go to the network menu, and there in the upper left corner, you can see this capture screenshot icon. Once it's enabled and you just refresh the page and load the page, what it does, it takes screenshot of the page while it's loading. So it's super handy for in a couple of different scenarios. For example, you're optimizing your website or application, and you want to see what is being loaded first. So it's really helpful to see what your users will see as the page is loading.
And it's going to work. So here's my Tamagotchi bouncing. The problem is, though, that I've now made my code async. I'm using set timeout, so I don't actually know when this animation is going to complete. So I can't properly know when to start another animation. And I might accidentally overwrite an animation or start one too late. So What I want is to resolve an animation and then handle another animation. And this sounds a lot like a promise. Promises represent eventual values. So I can run an animation in a promise, and when that animation is done, I can resolve it. And since promises are thenables, I can call .then on the promise and run another animation. So for the first version of this game, I used promises. I made a general purpose animate function, and it takes in a draw function and the milliseconds for the delay. So now we can create a simple bounce function using our bounce up animation and a bounce down animation using the same animate function. And this works. Wonderful. All done here. So now we can move on to creating the main gain loop. When you're not interacting with the Tamagotchi, it has an idle animation. It's going to bounce up and down, move a bit right, move a bit left, bounce up and down again. And to set this up, we're going to just create a loop function. We're going to call the idle animation, and when that completes, we're going to call loop again. So it's just an endless loop. OK, so we're all done, and I didn't use much time. Oh, yeah, wait, no. We have some problems. The first one is thenable hell. So back in the day, we used to use callbacks for our async work, and we would end up in the triangle of doom, aka callback hell. And it was pretty terrible, but I noticed when making this game that promises didn't really alleviate that. You're still in hell. It's just a different looking hell. So this side is promises how they might actually be used in this game. Like I might need to feed in information to an animation to tell it like how long to run or how many times to bounce. Or I might need to make like a decision in the promise chain. And this just gets like as unwieldy and as unmanageable as callback hell. And like don't mistake me for not loving promises, I do. But when you're using them for really large like async work, like the ease of them really breaks down very quickly. And I noticed another larger issue with using them for animations. The point of the Tamagotchi is that you're supposed to interact with it. I mean, the whole game is about caring for the Tamagotchi. So at some point, I need to suspend the idle animation in favor of a user-generated event, like feeding the Tamagotchi.
Cross-site request forgery was successfully exploited on the Netflix website a long time ago. And this is not the Netflix that we know today. This is the Netflix that used to post you DVDs. You couldn't stream that much video back in the day. So they'd post you DVDs through the post so you could watch at home. This attack was possible without injecting content into Netflix at all. In fact, there was no breach of the website. In fact, you could host this attack on your own website and then just convince people to visit that website. And we know that's easy to do because how many times have we seen this happen where you click on a link and it's not what you expect it to be? So what if you could convince people to visit your website? And what if those people were logged into Netflix? Well, you could do this. You could just pop an image down the bottom, just like we saw on the Final Fantasy forum. And then we could fit in a URL that goes to the Netflix website just like this. Now this URL adds a certain film to your queue. And if you sprinkle in a couple of other requests to change the account name on that account and to change the name and the shipping address, then you could ship yourself free DVDs courtesy of whoever looked at your website. And this was discovered in 2006 by someone called Dave Ferguson. And he was shipping himself all the films that he wanted to watch completely for free.
Have you ever wondered which is the actual algorithm used behind the native sort function in JavaScript? Or is it only me who thinks about these kind of things? Do I need a new hobby? Do I need to do something else? So this is actually something that I thought about. And the answer is that the ECMAScript standard doesn't really impose a certain algorithm to be used in the sorting function. This means that every JavaScript engine can actually do whatever implementation they feel like doing. So the good news is that actually all of these engines are open source and we can actually see the source code. And that's actually what I did. I did a little bit of a research and tried checking which algorithm was used behind every JavaScript engine.
So what an extension can do? Take notes, create alarms, block ads, debug your website, color picker. So precisely anything you want. So how to get started with a browser extension? So this is a basically framework which we'll be using for web extensions. I know it's a bit verbose, but the learning curve is a bit small though. So there's a manifest.json file. So it is basically the file which has the metadata of the add-on. Then we have content script, background script, page action, browser action, options page, and some web accessible resources. So let's start with manifest.json file. So as you can see, it has the metadata of the browser extension, like name, version, description, some files which we'll be using, some resources, and most important thing, permissions. For every extension, you have to permit to what it will be using. For example, if you are using storage APIs, you will be needing the storage permissions. So what are content scripts? Content scripts are something which are running on the browser. For example, if you have to interact with, if your extension wants to interact with the DOM APIs, you need something called as content script. Background scripts. So as name says, whatever runs in background is a background script. For example, if you want to use some functionalities which are not page specific, but the browser specific, for example, creating a notification, that has to be done in background script. I think this is known by everyone. One or other add-ons uses this. Something called as page action, something called as browser action. So page action by name, something which is relevant to page itself. For example, if you want to create an extension which says, hey, bookmark this page, as simple as that. So that can be page action. And there's something called as browser action. Browser action is more of like toolbar button. It's more relevant to the browser itself. For example, you have to inject any script in browser on a click of a button. That can be done using browser action.
The first thing I'm going to warn you is when somebody comes up and they tell you about something and say, hey, I don't really feel like I fit in. I don't feel like I belong here. Absolutely, on the pain of a messy death, do not tell them that this is just imposter syndrome. I'm going to tell you a very short story about the world's most cherubic 18-year-old at a hackathon who came up to me. I was working on JavaScript stuff. I swear quietly a lot when I work on front-end stuff. It's fine. And this angel, this wonderful little baby child came up to say, hey, what's up? I was like, oh, I'm very bad at this, and I'm just going to swear my way through it. Thank you and good day. I was like, no, angry old woman. Puppy dog cute. He was just bounding into this. You're not bad at this. You have imposter syndrome. And he, bless his cotton socks, had his whole life ahead of him. And I didn't want to go to jail, so he's fine. But you might be interacting with people who are ready to go to jail. Like, when folks come and tell you that this isn't working or stuff doesn't fit, they could be telling you about a poor culture fit. They could be telling you about discrimination. They could be telling you about real skills mismatches. Don't do this unless you're talking to people with a lot of mercy in their hearts. But one thing you can do is just be lovely. Give positive, actionable feedback. Say, hey, thank you so much for cleaning up those docs. I use these every day. Yeah, your bad's bad at self-assessment. Your brain loves getting data points. Give other people really positive data points.
Because numbers in JavaScript, they don't work like that. So the language, the concatenated language is the wrong way because it's using something called postfix notation. Like the function call comes after the arguments, but the thing is, arguments aren't really arguments. In here, arguments are also functions. So the magic sauce of a concatenated language is that everything is functions. In functional programming or in JavaScript, you have the notion that a function can be a value, but in concatenative land, even values are functions. And you build programs by taking smaller functions and composing them together, or concatenating them together. That's where the name comes from, using composition.
Most web applications today kind of look like this. Like there's just like a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of stuff being loaded onto pages like this that wouldn't be necessarily explicitly declared in a package JSON, but is being loaded remotely. And so that's kind of, it's a kind of like advertising banners, trackers, support widgets, and those are all executable scripts, generally, that are loaded onto your page when you load the page. And they're loaded from remote servers controlled by, who knows, hopefully you know. And then there's also multimedia, there's YouTube embeds, there's JavaScript libraries which you might load from a CDN. And so this is kind of a paradigm that we've become quite used to. And in Electron, that's very scary. Because when you do this in Electron, you're saying, hey, whenever my user runs the application, I'm just going to reach into all of these remote servers that I hope are not malicious and also not compromised. And I'm going to take their code and I'm going to run it on my user's machine with no sandboxing. So that's a really extreme amount of trust to give whatever advertising company or whatever whose scripts you're including. So this is something to really think about when you're writing Electron, is that you probably don't want to do a lot of these things. And for example, some of the performance benefits that you might get from using a CDN, in Electron you're just bundling all of that and shipping it to the user, and they're going to have it available offline. So the incentives are very different.
I give to you Package Quest. Our story begins not long ago, our hero developer. You are given a mission to build a great website to honor your gods of user. Your gods are numerous and vengeful and will not tolerate an experience less than pristine. Your bosses, the masters of C Team, are demanding that you appease the gods quickly so they can be granted riches in this life and the next. This task sounds grueling. Building each piece of a website from nothing involves strong magic, patience, and time. And in a world when each of these items is scarce, we need something to help us, something to guide us, something to give us the pieces that leave us less exposed to the cruel, monstrous insects that anger our user gods. There is a place that is spoken of that was used long ago. After the Great Programming War, when the Dark Ages came into place. All of our help and hopes were destroyed. And speaking of this location, and the tool to get there was forbidden. But word of mouth is passed on from generation to generation, and you, our hero, will search out and find the land of our desire, the registry. The only thing we know is that to enter the registry, there is talk of a tool, a magical weapon to destroy dependency hell that was forged by sorceresses of colorful hair. This tool survived multiple iterations and was faster and more powerful than anybody could have imagined. This tool is called NPM. NPM was cleanly broken apart by the sorceresses, in case the day ever came where it was needed to be built again.
So our graduates are doing really well now. That's one of their websites that two graduates built. It's Ali and Johannes in the audience, actually. And it's a really beautiful website. That's why I chose this particular one to show it to you. But they've been working on many more things that are equally wonderful. And they've ended up working for companies like Financial Times and startups like Turtle and We Got Pop and so on. So I can't even begin to say how proud I am of the progress that they've made, because I couldn't have done what they've done. I went to university. I had to spend years and years to learn how to code. They did it in 6 months, and I have to say that's pretty incredible. But you might think this is all great and good, but how exactly does this happen? How did this all come about? And there's a lot to it. But for me, it started with a Google search. So basically what happened was that I really wanted to do something about helping refugees, but I only know how to code. I'm not a doctor. I can't really do anything, or a lawyer. So I literally Googled Coding Refugees UK to figure out how I can volunteer in some way. And I didn't expect that to be successful, but look at me now. So what I found out is that someone had set it up in London, and I said, I want to set it up in Scotland. And I found out that Muzaffar was coming up to Scotland to do the same. So we all partnered up and made it happen. But it's the kind of thing, I think it might be the most successful Google search I've ever done. And as a software developer, that's something. So at first it started with one person, and then more people, and then more people, and more people. And I think it's a really valuable lesson because I oftentimes feel kind of powerless to make things happen and feel like, oh, I really want to do something. But Muzaffar literally started by creating a meetup page and saying, hey, I have this cool idea. Do you want to get together and make this happen? And people were like, yeah, I think this should be a thing. So it's really amazing how from this one little act, it's not very exceptional, something quite incredible will happen in people's lives. And I think there's some kind of lesson to that I'm sure you'll grasp.
I was sat in a meeting at my previous company with a colleague. We were waiting for it to start, so he was 10 minutes late, and he was on his iPad. He was VPN'd home to his Raspberry Pi and was queuing up movies to download. I thought it seemed like a lot of work. I knew of software that could download movies for me. I knew it had an API. I just wanted to be able to send a message, have it verified to me, and then it would go off and download. It would send me an IMDb link, I say yes, and that's it. It's done. But before I did that, I somehow managed to end up automating my lamps. So I send a message, they turn off. I take my time to send another message, eventually, and they turn back on. And when I first did this, I still occasionally do it now, I'll sit there and send the messages and just sit giggling to myself, because as web developers, we don't get this real world thing happening. We get a button changing color, or this moves across the page, or we load something from an API. We don't get lights turning on and off. And it's brilliant. It's a real world effect.
So chaos engineering, let's talk about what Chaos Monkey really, like the first iteration of Chaos Monkey is that I had 100 servers out there, and I wanted to test that my failover worked correctly. So what I would do is I would pick out one random server, and I would just either take it out of rotation, or I would pin its CPU at 100%, or I'd make it run out of memory or something like that. At this point, you could test to make sure if your infrastructure would be self-healing, right? That might not be a term that as a front-end developer you have heard before, but it's something that they use a lot in the DevOps community, is that they have self-healing infrastructure. Now, if I have one of my app servers and my cluster go down, what they want you to do is they want you to detect that something is wrong with it. They want you to rotate that out. They want you to take the load balancer and point it at something else, and if needed, spin up another server that then took the place of the other one. That's kind of the ideal situation. However, that doesn't really happen unless you kind of make those things happen. That just doesn't happen by itself. It's the same idea that if you throw building materials, it doesn't spontaneously erect into a house.
In between that 2009, when server-side JavaScript started being a thing, and now, we had a thing happened. Node's user base changed. I'm a throwback. I write server-side JavaScript when I'm lucky enough to get to write code at all anymore. I write it in the server. I write CLI apps. I write little modules. I write little back-end services to help bring you the JavaScript. I don't do front-end development. But NPM's users do front-end development. Almost all of you do front-end development. Almost exclusively. Maybe you'll do a little server-side stuff because you want to do server-side rendering. But the user base has changed.
So we're going to talk about privilege. Privilege is simply access. That's it. People think it's such a loaded word. It's just access. So who's ever seen this on National Geographic or whatever, the macaques, raise your hand if you've seen this picture. Exactly, that's why I use it, because I'm sure it wasn't until I saw a recent David Attenborough special that I understood that this is not, as many things in the world aren't what they seem. When you've probably seen them, they wanted to tell you what a beautiful story this was and how warm they are. But this is all about privilege, because as you see, there is a family inside the water, and you see this little fella here? He's just like, yeah, can I get in? No, This is a matriarchal family who's allowed to get in this water. So a female and her offspring are the only ones that are allowed to get into these hot springs. There are males on the outside that are protecting the other parts of the community who are out there freezing their behinds off from getting inside in the hopes that they can mate and maybe get inside. So I like to tell that story because we have this idea, because that's how nature shows has presented this as this great story. But there's always something behind the story. Marginalized people will never feel safe in your spaces, your organizations, your events, and your communities until you prioritize our safety. So here are some barriers to inclusion and diversity in tech. And so we're going to define some more terms. And this is where it's really going to get uncomfortable for some folks, but you'll be all right. I walk around like this all day. This is your litmus. You don't have to do this. You're good. All right? Words you must stop using now to describe people of color. And I mean now. I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm talking now. One of the things is, which will check your biases or issues, is, again, I'm a researcher. Who in here has done research? Raise your hand. You understand about validity and reliability, right? You need both for your study to be trusted as authority on information. So validity means it just makes sense. And reliability means that somebody can replicate it, right? So it makes sense and someone can replicate it. You need those two things because so much, as I said, we are biased human beings. Stop calling black people, people of color, aggressive. Just because we don't agree with you, I'm not aggressive. I'm asserting my point, just as you have a right to do. Stop calling us intimidating. Too many of us are getting shot and killed because you are intimidated. That's your personal code of conduct. That's your personal stuff, not ours. You're adults. I'm responsible for my own emotional growth, and so are you. Look at that definition. If I have not physically done anything to you, frightened, I'm not being intimidating. Defensive. I'm committed. I'm not going to back down just because you have a different opinion. I've seen that so much. Well, I told you, I gave you a different, okay, that's great. I don't have to take it. You can have all the opinions and whatever you want to. But that's a part of privilege. I see that a lot. When I post something, particularly when I'm talking about describing what racism is, oh my Lord, everybody wants to, now there's research. I mean, I can show them tons and tons, but they will have a different opinion. And because their opinion is different, because they're white, I'm supposed to just abdicate and say, yes, sir? Not happening. Use your privilege for something other than yourself. Thank you.